I'm going to show you how to make the most of cabbage, one of the most amazing winter vegetables because it keeps for so long and it's really present in almost any cuisine and culture I can think of. So it's incredibly varied and adaptable for anything you might want to make. It's also just as delicious raw as it is cooked, giving you a lot more options as well. This particular cabbage is a Savoy type cabbage, which means that it has these crinkly leaves and is a little bit of a looser head. It's not quite as heavy and dense as a typical red cabbage or green cabbage that you might be familiar with. They're all delicious. They're all really sweet in the winter. Again, best to be eaten in the colder months when the plant has had time to get sweeter. So now we're going to look at it. They all have a core. The Savoy types have less of a core than some of the green and red varieties, but it is pretty tough and we're going to want to cut it out. A cabbage core sometimes is tender enough to keep, but often you do want to remove it. So now we have our cabbage, and I'm going to talk about making it into a slaw. So I love eating cabbage in slaw form raw. So it goes really well with other crunchy vegetables. In this case, it's watermelon radish and carrots, but you could really add whatever you'd like, or just have a slaw be just cabbage. To make a slaw, you want to chop the cabbage pretty fine. And you could shred it in a food processor. I tend not to because it gets really watery that way. So I like to just use a sharp knife. And then to complete the slaw, I really like a vinaigrette, not so much of a creamy type dressing, which might be more traditional, but I love making a really simple dressing with lime juice, with some olive oil. You can add some fresh herbs like cilantro or mint or basil or parsley. Fresh herbs are delicious. A few scallions or any kind of onion would be good. And then just that really basic vinaigrette. So that is one of the most delicious ways to make cabbage, and use it especially in the winter when you want something crunchy and bright and would like a salad but don't have as many salad greens typical. So cabbage is the perfect thing to use at that time. One of my favorite simple side dishes to make is simply sautéed cabbage. It sounds crazy, but you need nothing but a really large skillet and some olive oil and some salt, or any kind of oil and some salt. And if you're cutting it to just sauté it, you don't need to cut it as fine as you would for a slaw. You can cut it any size you'd like, really, but in terms of ease of eating, it's better to not be too big. So I tend to cut it in sort of bite-sized pieces. And then, yeah, as I said, simply sauté it in a large skillet. You want a large skillet so it browns a little bit and doesn't just steam. So here's our simply sautéed cabbage with a little bit of olive oil and salt. I particularly like cabbage because I grew up in Germany and Germans eat a lot of cabbage. And they combine cabbage and potatoes often. So one of my favorite things to do is to dice a bunch of potatoes. If you cut them pretty small, they cook quickly. And then sort of sauté/pan fry those in a large skillet. And then in another skillet, chop up the cabbage just like we did when we sautéed it simply. So you sauté the cabbage, fry the potatoes, and then you scooch over the potatoes or the cabbage to make room to fry some eggs. And then you crack the eggs in the pan, you fry those, and then you have a delicious meal of cabbage with potatoes with egg on top. And to be really German, you could add a little caraway seed or a little cumin seed when you're frying those potatoes in the cabbage, which gives it a special little touch. Cabbage also makes delicious sort of soup or braise and stews. And one of my favorite combinations is to have white beans, either cooked at home or out of the can, that you add to some sautéed cabbage that you've cooked with a little bit of garlic and maybe some hot chili. And then you mix that again, either and make it more of a stew and add more liquid, or just keep it drier. That's a delicious combination. Cabbage also makes a really good soup. There's a Portuguese soup called caldo verde, which is delicious, which is cabbage and potatoes and chorizo. There's a version that I make that is white beans and cabbage, and you can either use dry beans that you've cooked yourself or beans out of a can. And that you would flavor with garlic and chili and the cabbage and the beans. And that makes a delicious simple soup or braise. A Japanese dish using cabbage that I love is a really simplified version of okonomiyaki, which are cabbage pancakes. And you just thinly slice the cabbage, much like you would do for the slaw, and then you make a really simple batter with a few eggs, a little bit of flour, a little bit of soy sauce, and toasted sesame oil, and a whole bunch of scallions that you thinly slice and add to the cabbage mixture. And then you mix that up and make little pancakes, or one large one that you cut into wedges, and you fry those, pan fry those. And then you dip them in mayo that you mix with hot sauce and soy sauce, which makes everything better. Cabbage, of course, makes delicious sauerkraut, and I keep a jar in my fridge in the wintertime that I use on sandwiches or heat up a little bit and maybe add a sausage or some potatoes to. This version has a little bit of cumin and mustard seeds, which I particularly like, but that is one way of preserving all that cabbage that you might get in a CSA share or at the market if you get a particularly large cabbage. So making sauerkraut is very simple. So look for those beautiful cabbages at the market. They keep really well. Keep them on hand, and then you can make a slaw or saute them simply or turn them into a soup or those wonderful pancakes or ferment some of them into kraut, but enjoy them all winter.